This is Timmy, the toilet roll holder. Like this. It's got a velcro bottom. Okay, so this is what we're making today. Here is our main pattern sheet. This is an A4 sheet and everything is at the right size if it's printed off at this size. This is almost the length of an A4, an A3 sheet. So you don't need to cut out a pattern for this, but this is so that you can see exactly what the dimensions are. And this will be cut in length. This is 40.5 centimetres. 40.5 centimetres from very end here to the very end here. Widthways here we are now 14.5 centimetres from here to here. The seam allowance marked with this line along here is 1.5 centimetres all the way around. And I'm stitching the head at approximately 17 centimetres from the very end, but that only needs to be approximate. As long as it's in the middle, that's the main thing. What you'll need, two pieces like this, one in your outside fabric and another one for your inside fabric. And I've chosen to use an inside fabric that's plain, that contrasts the outside and matches the nose here, which is called the front of face on this part here. So this is a plain contrasting fabric. It doesn't have to be, it can be whatever you want, but that's what I've chosen to do. The other thing you're going to need is something for making eyes and nose. Lace or a trimming. You don't have to have it, but I think it looks nice to have that on the edge. Something again contrasting. I chose a green to pick out the green here. The other thing that's not obvious is I've put a little bit of felt inside the ears. It just gives them a little bit of stability there. So we just need a piece of felt that's smaller than that inside. And one other thing that I've made on this one is a little hook at the top. Okay, on to cutting out these pieces. Personally, I like to use card to cut around. What you might want to do is to glue that onto a piece of card and then cut it out. I've done something similar already. Nothing fancy required. Kellogg's will do. So I'm choosing to have this turquoise as my contrasting. I've got this as my patterned part. So I'm going to lay this out and draw around my pattern pieces and start cutting everything out. I'm going to put this butt it right up to the edge because this is a nice straight edge on here. Fine. I'm going to butt up my ruler and all the way up there. Just check that it has actually, and then along here. Yeah, I might just need to, oh no, that's fine. Okay, so that's one piece here, and I need to do the same with the other. So I'm going to go away and do that. Now I'm just cutting out the front of face. This is the contrasting part. There we go. Now I've drawn all the way around. Now I'm drawing on the back of the fabric, but it doesn't really matter. For this particular part, there is only one piece and it's the same both sides, so it really doesn't matter which way up you have it. So I'm thinking about the best way to use my fabric. I've just cut this long piece off the edge here, so I'm going to move this up. I'm going to fold that in half, and I'm going to try and use this bit first so that I'm not wasting lots of fabric. So this is how I've arranged my pieces to fit on here. This is folded, right sides together and pinned. I've drawn around here, and the ear here, and I've also managed to get another pair of ears in there. So I'm reckoning once I've opened this out, I'll have adequate for this last little piece on the end there. So that means all I've done is taken one big strip off my fabric. Pin these together so that when you start cutting out, the underneath piece doesn't just fall away. Just cut around the very edge, not too close. So I've got all my pattern pieces there, and now I've got my spare fabric here. I can open up this piece at the end, and as you'll see, it's more than adequate for my central forehead. So there we go, there's plenty there, and I'm gonna push the boat out and say there's probably enough there for my little tag as well. Let me cut these pieces out more precisely. Just got it all out on there on the width of 110 width, so 110 centimetres by 14.5. The other fabric, and then just this little extra piece for the face. Here's my remaining piece, just enough to put my... So now you can see all the pieces laid out. I've got the right side and the right side together. I've kept these other parts where I've got more than one piece, I've kept them pinned together for the time being, but you can see them next to their pattern parts. Now what we're going to need to do, and we've also got our little tag there as well, we're going to need to gather up the lace next, because it would be a lot easier to gather up the lace, then attach it to one of these pieces before putting these pieces together. So what we're going to do is to sew along that lace with a tack stitch. I've got that facility on my machine, and then we're going to draw it along, which will gather it. So I shall go and do that next. If you want to do it by hand, you can do that by hand. You just sew big long stitches and tie it off at one end and then just pull your thread. Okay, let me do that next. This is how I keep my bobbins together, much cheaper than the ones you buy in the shop. These are just Kirby grips. Now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to leave the pink thread, the pink bobbin in here, and put this one to match my fabric onto the lace. And the reason for that is because it's going to be a lot easier to see which one to pull with contrasting thread colours, and you'll see what I mean in a minute. Now if you're doing this with the lace on a machine, you need to have long tails, and you cannot start with a back stitch or finish with a back stitch, or use your automatic thread cutter if you have one, because you're going to need to pull the threads out at the end as well. So I'm going to measure up my lace next. Just be aware that lace does have a right and a wrong side. You do have to look very closely. It doesn't matter at this stage which is the right and the wrong side, but it's going to matter when you put it onto the base of the toilet roll holder, because you want the right side to be facing outwards and on display. This is the right, correct side of the lace, and this is the wrong side. Very slightly different. It's more raised on the top, where the pattern is on the top, and less so on the bottom. So I'm going to stitch along here with a basting stitch, or in other words a big long tacking stitch, big long wide stitches, so that I can pull the thread and draw it up. That saves me having to manually gather the lace. I've got a Singer Quantum Stylist here, and my button over here allows me to change the width or the length of my stitch. Actually, not the width. Well, I can change the width, but I'm going to change the length. I'm going to put it up to the maximum, which here is 5. I've got my long tails off at the back, and then I'm just going to start myself off. I'll show you just a little bit of me doing this, just taking it nice and slow so that the stitches stay on this part of the lace that will be most easily gathered up. I'm going to take it all the way to the end and then show you what happens next. So here I am coming to the end. I'm going to take it to the last stitch. I'm not going to back stitch, I'm not going to cut the thread, I'm just going to lift the needle and pull it out with a long tail on it. Now, this is where the dual coloured thread comes in really handy. I've got pink on one side, which you can barely see, and blue on the other. That means I know if I pull the blue thread at one end, I need to pull the blue thread at the other end. It can be a lot easier to gather these things up if you do it from both ends. So off I go, gathering up like this all the way, and obviously I need to move the gathers along the thread, and I'll do this so I get about halfway, but what I need to do is keep an eye on the overall length of this so that it ends up the same length as my long piece of fabric. So I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to come back and show you what happens next. I would say this is probably the most fiddly. I find it the most fiddly. Okay, I'm happy that this is now the right length. If I pull this out like that, that fits at either end. But to get this nice and gathered evenly, I'm going to tie a knot. This is going to stop it from changing length. I need to make that a little bit closer to the lace. Let's just push that up to there. Okay, at each end a little knot with the knotting the pink and the blue together. That's going to stop this from unravelling, and then all I need to do is just to even out these pleats a little bit more. This is why I say this is the most fiddly thing, because they all bunch up together and then it all twists around. So once you've got it a little bit more even, it will be easier to manage. So once I've done that, I will show you what happens next. But that's looking better. As you can see, it does kind of twist up, which is really annoying. And the next thing we need to do is to pin it to the right side of one of these pieces. Now when you're pinning, once you've determined the correct side of your lace, now this is the proper side of my lace here, I'm going to turn it to face the correct and also the pattern side of my pattern fabric, and I'll just pin it onto the fabric like this, close to the edge. So I'm going to pin it just to the edge of the fabric, just below that, because I've got a larger seam allowance on this, remember, than I have on the other pieces, and there's a reason for that, and it's because of this lace. So I'm going to use half of the seam allowance to give me a bit extra here, and the other half of the seam allowance will be when I sew the two pieces together along there. And the lace is facing inwards, not outwards. That means once it's attached and the other piece is attached to it, the correct side of the lace faces out with the correct side of the fabric. Now, even if you get to the end and you've got a little bit left over, you can either chop it off, or even if you've actually tied this, that's fine. Just pull the one that you've been pulling before. In this case it's the blue one. Just pull that a little bit, and I'm going to gather that up until it's exactly the right length. If it was the other way around and you get to the end and somehow you've managed to not have it long enough, don't panic. You don't have to undo the whole thing. Just go back a little way and tug it, not too far, back to about here, just snip the thread, you'll get a bit more extra at the end there, and then it'll be okay. As long as you've already pinned everything else, the pins will hold it in place then. The gathering just helps you to get there. Now I don't want this too bulky at the very end because this is going to be inside the seam, so that there is fine. Trim that off a little bit, but I have left the knot in there. Okay, so let me show you this up close. I've got quite a lot of pins in there because I want it to stay in place. So I'm going to sew along pretty much over the top of the blue thread. So I've used about 1/3 of my seam allowance there. It doesn't have to be exact, but what I do want to make sure is that I'm not, by the time I've put my seam allowance in, we'll be able to see all of this part of the lace. I'm going to thread up the other one and get that ready and pin that down in exactly the same way. Just a little tip, if you've not done this before, when you're pulling, don't pull from a distance, pull close to the lace. Otherwise you've got more chance of it breaking. So you just keep the length short, shuffle it along, and you'll find that you'll get the best results like that. If you try and pull it from a distance, you're far more likely just to break your thread and you'll have to start all over again. The two parts B here, attached still by the pin. Now we're going to actually take these apart because we're not joining those together. We've got these two. I'm going to open them out like this, So if we were to look at what we've got there, that's this piece there. So that's the neck there, the neck, there's the neck down there. And this, if we're looking at this, what we're looking at here are these pieces, oops, in front of the camera, we're looking at these pieces like that. We're going to attach the forehead, which is this piece here, oops, and then we're going to pin it onto the front of the face once that's sewn. We need to sew along here. With the small seam allowance, and then once they're attached like that, then we'll do the same with this end to that end, and we'll have a semicircle which is going to be the front of the face like that. It's the forehead, this is the cheeks there, and the plain bit will go in the middle. But I'm just going to do this by eye. I don't feel I need to pin it, but I do feel that I need to make that very, very accurate. One little back stitch, all the way down to the other end, back stitch. Okay, so that's one side. Okay, along there, nice and accurate. Okay, little back stitch, just to keep that in order. Oops, and make sure that's nice and lined up. And one back stitch. Oh, there's my forehead part. Now this, it is a little bit tricky, but it's not too bad. But what you need to do is make sure that you've got the right side. So here we are, let's turn over, find the right side of this. That's the right side. So we need to turn that over like that and then pin this. Now this is obviously a very weird shape that we've got going on here. So tips for pinning: make sure that the correct side of the plain piece is facing the correct side of this piece. Now you are not pinning to this outer edge, you're pinning to this edge, which is tricky. So what you want to do is just find the middle, just give it a little finger press, pinch that. Probably do the same over here, line them up together, little finger press there, and then you can line these two up. Start with that one and pin that first. Pin those two together. Don't want to scratch my table. There we go. So I'll lean on my perspex measuring that. And then this, if you go very carefully around this, it will match, believe it or not. Now I'm going to sew up from this side, that will be a lot easier. And I just probably need quite a few pins in there because this needs to be really accurate, otherwise it won't match up at the other side. But again, we'll be putting exactly the same. There we go, just a few more mil down there. You're putting exactly the same seam allowance on this small one. The only one that gets that big old seam allowance is the bit that we did with the lace, and that's because you just need a bit more room to fit that lace in. So you have to fold this around the corners, as it were. I guess anybody that's inexperienced might find this a bit difficult, so I'm just going to show you. It feels unintuitive to match that shape to this one, so just take it a little bit at a time. Fold it a little bit if you need to, just so that the edges are lining up. And keep going around like that. As you get towards the end, you're going to have to gather a little bit more because the shape becomes less intuitive for matching to the other one. You've got a curve that's going this way, curve that's going that way, and a curve that's going the other way. So, yeah, just keep going round, hold the edges together, it is important that the edges are aligned, but as I say, I think if you just take your time, I actually find this a lot easier than the lace part. The lace part is the fiddliest bit of all for sure. Once you've got this pinned and in place, look at that, perfectly aligned. Once you've got this pinned and in place, this really is easy because you're just going to run around it with the sewing machine. I'm going to stick one at the very, very end there just to make sure this stays aligned all the way to the bank, as they say. Right, there we go. So this is what it looks like now that it's pinned. Okay, so there it is, pinned. Now, I've already said I'm going to keep the flat side on the sewing machine and around here. That's why I've put my pins on top so I can pull them out as I go round. Okay. Again, just in case you're not feeling very confident about sewing around this, you can see I'm just doing a very, very small seam allowance. Let's see if I can get the zoom in on that a bit better. Just a very small seam allowance, taking my time. Take the pin out when I get very close so that the fabric doesn't move out of place. Make sure that I don't put a pleat in where I don't want one. There we go. So keeping that small seam allowance the same all the way round. Let's get that one ready to come out. Get as close to the pin as you can without breaking your needle. So you can tell how long I'm spending on this. I'm taking my time, and it will work really, really well. If you do just take your time, you'll get a good finish. There we are, and it will line up nicely, so you won't have any issues fitting the whole thing together. I was a bit worried about how small the seams were when I first did this, but actually I've not had any problems at all. So backspace, cut off your thread, and then you'll see what we've got now. And there is our front of face. Okay, so what we're looking at here is that basically, and this is going to be sewn up later. So we've got the front of the face now. We've also got the back of the face that we looked at earlier. And the next thing we need to do is to put these two together. However, we're going to want to put the ears in at the same time. Now, I haven't finished this ear, but let me just put this in here now. When the ear is finished, and I'll show you how to do that, then what we need to do is to make sure that it's going to sit up the right way at the end. So therefore, we're going to need it to go in that way so that when the seam is on it, it will be out there. I put my ears just central to this other seam. Okay, but as I say, this ear isn't quite finished yet. Then I'd pin these two together with the other way around. Pin these two together, right sides together. There we are. So the neck is together and the ears are in the middle, and so on and so forth. But I'll show you that in another video. Well, not another video, but another clip. So I've got my two ears. I've adapted my pattern to show the size of the piece of felt that I'm going to cut out. You can see I've got a bit of room in the width there. As I pop that felt in, I'm pushing it up to the top. I'm just going to pin those to a pleat on either side and then stitch across that. It was a little bit fiddly. All right, I'm going to do the pinch on both sides simultaneously. There we go, that's a bit better. It's only a tiny little pinch, it's just a weeny pleat. Teeny weeny, there we go, there's one. Now I've still got a bit of fabric left at that end to create the next pleat, so I'll do it like that and put the pin in. That's more successful, isn't it? That's probably the way to go. Just need to make sure it's coming through the other side, because what I'm going to do is I'm just going to stitch across that just to hold those pleats in place on both ears. And just close to the edge, again, very, very small. You can do a back stitch if you want to, but just all you want to do is hold those pleats in place, basically. And we'll do the same with the other one. Doesn't really matter which way around we do this. Next, my tag. This is easy peasy. Down the end. And around there. Similar sort of seam allowance. Doesn't need to, it's as wide as you want your tag to be, really. Just make sure your edges are lined up. This is good side to good side. All the way down to the bottom. Don't go over the final end because you need to be able to turn this inside out. Here it is, inside out. This is the joined up end at the top. This is a hollow tube, and the hollow tube goes into, just move that out a little bit so you can see the hollow tube goes in there, and then you actually push up from the other end, and then it pushes it inside. I cannot do this in front of the camera. Anyway, suffice to say that in a moment I will have this the right way round. As you can see, I've got adequate length there, here, so I don't need all that. I just had that much, so I can stitch it in and just cut off the excess afterwards if I want to. So the next thing to do is to pin this lot in place. Here's my tag. I'm going to have as much of that sticking out as I want, but it needs to be pointing down this way. The ears, if that's definitely the way around that I want them, then I'm going to place them that way, right across this seam at the top of the forehead. So there. I'm actually going to push my ears out a little bit from the edge of the fabric. It's probably worth just pinning these here in place, just where I want them, so I know they're right in the middle with a bit of overhang there, because this is kind of curved, you see, so if you try and put these edges along, so make sure that the curve is over the edge of there. Then you can put your, however much of your hook you want sticking out. I think I'm going to go for about that much, and I'm just going to chop the end off afterwards. And then here's the back. Remember, that's the neck there. So this needs to go face in, so it's turned inside out later. So now, same again, right from the middle of the forehead we need to work out exactly where halfway is, and we need to pin this. In fact, you can even go from these corners and pin this all the way round and then stitch it. I've pinned the back of the head now to the front of the head. I just matched it up all the way around. My ears are inside, pointing down that way. My tag is inside. This is just the extra I've got. The loop of the tag is in there, and having pinned it, I decided that actually it might have been better if I'd pinned the other side, just because I've got this kind of fabric hanging around here and I don't want it to get caught up in the machine. So I've just put a little pin in there just to hold it all out of the way, because I'm going to have this side up when I sew around it, so I can pull my pins out. So that's what I'm going to do next. I'm going to sew around the edge all the way around here, small seam allowance, just what I've been using before, and this is the neck here, which is going to remain open. So here it is, stitched all the way around the edge. When I got up here, because I'm going to have potentially a little bit of weight hanging on this tag, I've just gone backwards and forwards over that little area. The ears are fine, I've just gone once round all the way there. So now I'll turn this in the other way round, and we've got the beginnings of what's going to look like Timmy, the toilet roll holder. So the next thing is to stitch the nose. You can see on this other one there's a seam that comes down here for the nose, so I'll do that next. Then after that I'll put the eyes and the nose on. So now you're going to turn this back inside out, and you're going to pin these two bits together. So just match up that corner with this. We're going to go all the way down to the neck. So we're going to go past the blue, or past the plain fabric, all the way down to the neck. And again, same small seam allowance. I'm just going to go and pin that and stitch that now. Now I turn it back in the other way. I've stitched all the way down there. So all that remains now is, I don't even need to trim off the inside of that. It just means I'll need less stuffing, so no need to trim that off. But I'm going to put the eyes and the nose on. I'm going to put my eyes just on the seam there and on the seam there, and just slightly away from the nose, and then I'm going to put the nose right on there. This is where the eyes look about right. So just a little bit away from the plain fabric, but that is along this seam that goes up to the ears. You can use anything you've got really. On a previous one I used some sequins with a little bead over the top for eyes, because I matched the colours there, with a button, see that from the side there, with a button for the nose. But I quite like the flat one, but you can use whatever you got. Yeah, I think that works now that I've pressed it into place. These are called snapper plastic button fasteners. Here's my stuffing. We're going to stuff, and you can use anything you like, although this is just regular, probably toy stuffing. I think I've got this. I'm just going to put it in here. If you pack it in tight enough, you won't really need to oopsie-daisy, you won't need to iron the seams on the head, because this will just push them out. You can if you want to, but let me finish stuffing this. It will take quite a bit. You do want it to be quite packed. Here it is, all stuffed. All stuffed. Next thing I'm going to do is, I don't need the machine anymore. I'm going to, by hand, I'm going to sew round very close, again small seam allowance with a big tack stitch, and then I'm going to draw it up, hold it still and go round again, draw it up, tighten it off until eventually I end up with a very small circle. Same matching thread that I had from the machine. I'm going to use one of these long needles just because I find it easier. You can use any needle, but this just enables me to pick up more on one go. Double thread it to give you extra strength. Put a knot in the end. So just in case anybody's unconfident about what they're doing, really doesn't matter where you start, but I'm going to come in from the inside. I've got a knot on the end of that. I'm just going to go over a few times just to make sure that if the knot gives, I don't lose my stitching. And then, as you can see, quite a small, hopefully you can see that, quite a small seam allowance. Really doesn't matter because I'm going to go over it twice. Big tack stitches. Hope you can see what I'm doing. And then continue that all the way around until I get to the other side. So I'm just coming round to the other side. You'll see now why I like to use these long needles, because I can just go up and through multiple times in one. Push through. Now I'm coming to full circle. Just going to hold this like this and draw this in. Like with the lace, hold close to where it meets the fabric so that you don't find that it snaps. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold the thread and the fabric at the same time so that it doesn't disappear on me and all come out again, and I'm going to just run that through a few times to hold it in place, and then when I let go it shouldn't all unravel. There we go, all held in. Now I am going to go round again now that it's held in, and just over the same sort of stitches, just to make sure that's really secure. But now he's well stuffed. Oops, he's well stuffed, and he'll be ready to go on his body shortly. Tie off your ends a couple of times, just feed it through the loop. Up like that, feed it through the loop. One more for luck, through there, feed it through the loop, and then you're good to chop off that bit of thread. Now when it comes to attaching this to the body here, at the moment we've still got this end pinned. So we probably want to deal with that first so that we're not trying to sew Velcro on with the sewing machine, because I said we didn't need the sewing machine anymore, did we? But I lied, because we do. We're going to use the sewing machine for the Velcro. Now, I have actually got Velcro that is sticky on one side, i.e. it's adhered by glue, and the other side is stitch on. If you can get non-sticky, do. If this is the front, then I'm going to make the front sit on top of the other one. That's important, because that way you don't see that at the front. You won't hopefully see anything because it should sit right underneath, but if he does roll backwards a little bit, then you're not going to see that seam. So what we want to do is to decide, and I'm going to have this just under here, and then decide that he's going to sit on top there, going to hold it all together, turn it over and say, okay, this is where I need my guide circle. So just thinking about some choices that I had to make, I've decided to stitch with the sewing machine the still open end when I attach the stitching part of the Velcro. This one's a stitch only, because I've got to stitch over this anyway to stitch that on, and I'll stitch that with the blue thread. However, this end I've got a stick-on Velcro here, which isn't ideal, so I've decided to make the best of this and use the end, the already good end, to put this on. And I'm going to sew by hand. I'm using quite a good quality, I'm using a Gutermann thread for this. I normally just use whatever I've got, any old sew-all thread will do. But for this I'm going to make sure I've got a reasonably strong thread. And to answer the obvious question, if it's stick-on, why do you need to sew it? Because it's not really designed to be stuck on fabric, I don't think. So the benefit to doing it this way is that there won't be any stitching on this end, which is going to be my front end with the head facing this way. What I will say is this is very, very hard to keep these stitches tidy when you're trying to push through this sticky, and because it's designed to hold, it really is sticky. Pushing through this is really quite challenging to get it tidy, but as you can see, once you've actually got it through, it's okay, but it's positioning it right to get it through that's the hard thing. So yeah, don't go and buy the stuff that I've got. I didn't buy it for this, this just happened to have this, and so I thought, okay, I'll use it. So obviously don't go buy the sticky stuff. But if you've already bought some sticky stuff and you've got it, well then you can use it. Just, you know, my motto is make do, because there's always more than one way to swing a cat. There we go. You get the idea. Just for the record, I wouldn't swing a cat. I am an animal lover, although I am a dog. They say you're either a dog or a cat person. I am a dog person, but I do like cats. I like all animals, I think. Prefer the furry ones. Well, that's not true, because I like elephants. They're not furry. Well, actually they are if you go up very close. They do have I'm just not so into reptiles, if I'm honest. But yeah, I still wouldn't want to see an animal swung, whatever it was. So, just for the record, that is. Each time I go through this sticky Velcro, the thread gets a bit stickier. So it's just as well nearly at the end, because I think this thread is liable to break soon. So I have put 1 or 2 small kind of holding stitches in, rather than just keep going all the way along, just in case it breaks anytime soon. I don't have to go back quite so far. But as I've got a little bit more experienced at stitching through it, the stitches have got tidier. So that was where I started off, not very good up there at all. But as I come down here, and with the help of the pliers just to pull it through, it's not too bad at all. So there we are. So remember to check when you put your Velcro on that you don't go and stick it on both on the same side, otherwise it's going to, you need one piece on the outer fabric and one piece on the inner fabric. I'm going to stitch the other one on now, and because it's going to be inside, it really won't matter that I'm going to stitch over this. I'm just going to attach it and then put the pins back in, so I don't need to stitch this twice, this end. And now I want to draw my circle that I mentioned earlier. I found this little pot. Here is my bottom bit. I've got my Velcro on here now. So with that done up, this is going to be my front, so that if he does roll over you can't see any stitching or the Velcro. And so with that just slightly back of centre, I'm popping this flat, popping the head on top, making sure he's exactly central. Undo this again. Now I'm actually going to Velcro him up the other way just to hold him in place just a little bit easier. Now what I need to do now is to draw my circle, so I can just get a feel for where he is. He's around about here, so I'm going to pop a pin on there just so that I know exactly where the middle is, like that. And then I can draw my circle around that with the pin right in the middle. This pen is heat erasable, blue anyway, but I'm just going to put the pot over the top of that pin and actually pull it out to make it easier to draw on. Make sure it's widthways in the middle. Yeah, I don't have to draw a full circle, I can just put a few little marks around the edge, but as I say, this pen will come off anyway, with a bit of a heat source. Just be sure that if you are putting a heat source on that you don't have it too hot and melt your lace. So now, with the head held, which I'm going to do by holding this on, with the head held on the other side, I'm going to stitch around that circle, picking up a bit of the head and here, and I'm going to try and keep the stitches along here really tidy. I'll probably do a back stitch or something like that, but let's see. Let's get it all ready to start sewing. I'm going to use double thread, and I'm going to use this long needle I've got. It's one of those doll making needles, but you can use any needle. Because I've got one, I'm going to use it because I find it easier. got my thread ready, and I'm held my inner circle, and I was checking around it, and I thought, no, it's a little bit close. I'm going to draw my bigger circle just as a guide, and I'm going to aim to go round in between the two. I've got a good length of double thread. That would be about 80 centimetres doubled, and I'm going to start by picking up from inside here. I've put a knot on the end, so I don't want the knot to show, I don't want the end to show, so I'm just going to go through this a couple of times just to make sure it's securely started. And then again, I'm going to make sure that the centre of this is over the centre of the hole, and that I can pick up. Where am I starting from? I'm starting from around here. So if I go straight through there, that puts me there. So you can see I have, if I come out here, I will be all right. Around here, it's just, yeah, so it is a bit close on this side, so a little bit closer that way, and I'm going to go in the middle of the two. So I just need a few mil round. I'm just going to hold it on nice and tight like that. This is where the long needle comes in really handy, because I'm pushing it right down into the stuffing and back up. And do you know what? I'm going to do one running stitch all the way around, and then I'm going to do another one in the gaps rather than doing back stitch. I did back stitch before, and I didn't think it looked as tidy. Pushing down into the stuffing. This is why an extra long needle is quite helpful. And I can just check. Yeah, that's fabulous. And hopefully you can see what I'm doing here. Coming through. It is an unwieldy piece of thread, as I said before, but there's a reason why I've chosen to make it as long as that. It's because I want one continuous piece of thread. It will make it look tidier if I can go around it twice without having to restart. So still just checking. Yeah, that's fine. Everything's covered up there. Holding it steady. I mean, you can pin this in, but it's easy enough just to hold on to it. So I'm going to go all the way around this, just picking up every now and then, just checking that the stuffing isn't showing at the back. And then I'll show you when I've got to the end. I'm coming around for the second time now. I've decided I am going to go around a second time and fill in the gaps. So I'm doing a back stitch, but I'm filling in the gap from this stitch right up to the next one after that, coming out. You can do it however you like, really, as long as it looks nice. And as I say, these pen marks will come off way down in that one, back up to the next one there. When you're dealing with these long threads like this double, you do have to check that it doesn't get a little knot in it. Okay, I'll take this to the end. I've gone all the way around twice. I'm happy that the head is properly secured on. I'm just going to push in and manipulate this so it comes out close to the neck on the other side, and this is where I'm going to put my finishing stitches in. Just make sure that that's not got any loops on this side before I, and it has, before I do that, because obviously once you've tied it off, then you're not going to be able to get rid of those loops. Okay, how's that looking? That's good. Alright, so I can just go close in now to my seam and just put a couple of finishing stitches right in that corner. Here we go. So we'll go through once, through the loop, twice, through the loop, and once more for good measure. slightly to one side, I think, just so we don't put all the strain in one place. Right, last time through the loop. Now I'm confident that that's sufficiently tight that I can snip that off, and let me tell you, we're finished. We have Timmy the toilet roll holder along with his friends Timmy and Timmy, or maybe we've got Timmy and Tina, who knows. But yes, this is Timmy the toilet roll holder. Let me stick him on his toilet roll. I could at least have got a nice new plush toilet roll instead of this one that's got squished, couldn't I? But there we are, I haven't. But he sits quite nicely there. In fact, I think he's tipping his head to one side slightly. Is he thinking about whether he wants to be a toilet roll holder or not? Don't be silly, Helen. Right, there we are. Timmy the toilet roll holder and friends. And you can make one too. Have fun!